Day 787 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 459,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 950 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, so 16 tanks, 23 APVs, and a whopping 41 artillery. Then, before heading to the map, some noteworthy news developments to mention, as the US House of Representatives passed a bill yesterday, paving the way for allocating nearly $61 billion to support Ukraine, alongside other measures including the seizure and transfer of frozen Russian assets held in the US to Ukraine, among other things. Although the bill does need to pass the Senate in the upcoming days, and at this stage is believed to be more likely to pass than not. As such, this latest development is seen as quite the potential blow for Russia, which might put their military in a mad dash to make any further land grabs that they can now, whilst also re-gearing and preparing for a summer defensive or fortifications, as opposed to preparing their formerly expected summer offensive actions. But time will certainly tell soon. Then, headed across to the map, as in a coordinated set of actions over the weekend, Ukrainian drones targeted multiple locations across Russia, including the regions of Belgorod, Smolensk, Kaluga, Tula, Kursk, and Bryansk. And among the targets was an oil depot in Smolensk, which was set ablaze, alongside with the electrical substations in Kaluga and Bryansk that were also hit and left burning. However, strangely, Russian authorities claimed that all 50 drones were intercepted and destroyed. As per usual, perhaps. Now, according to an intelligence source, the large-scale drone attack on Russia's energy infrastructure was a joint operation conducted by the Security Service of Ukraine, so the SBU, the Military Intelligence Agency, so the HUR, and the Special Operations Forces, so the SOF. Also, the drones reportedly targeted energy infrastructure that powers Russia's military-industrial complex, causing disruptions in electricity in some of those affected regions. Now, typically, Russia uses some of their air defense systems, missiles, for surface-to-surface strikes into Ukraine. But with the increased regularity of these types of Ukrainian operations occurring into Russian airspace, it puts Russia in a bit of a spot, as they then need to use these air defense systems for their originally intended purpose instead. An example of this would be for Russia's S-300 systems, for which they have more missile inventory on that system than any other. But now, with Ukraine's notably increased targeting of Russian military assets inside of Russia, something's gotta give. Then headed into the Ukrainian map today, into the Donbass, as newly geolocated footage showed further advances of Russian troops along the highway towards Chasiv Yar, from the southern side near Ivaniska. And best to zoom out at this point because the goal is clear: attack Chasiv Yar from two sides. And so the Russian army may choose to divert resources from other zones as a last-ditch attempt to try to take Chasiv Yar, as it's likely the Kremlin might start to feel like it's running on borrowed time at this stage of the war, with what looks to be a large impending military aid package or set of packages for Ukraine soon. But having said all that, diverting military resources from one location to another on the map can also very much have an inverse effect on the field as well, with the then loss of those now unprotected lands. Then to the Avdiivka axis, as after initially being repulsed on the southern outskirts, newly geolocated footage shows that Russian personnel managed to grab a foothold in Ocheretina, specifically the very southeast of the town, below the railway line, just a smidge. Now, this is only infantry at the moment, with heavy fighting ongoing right here. But looking around a bit more broadly in the east, a Russian T-90 tank known as the Breakthrough tank was destroyed near the front, As you can see there, the hatch was left open after it was abandoned, so the AFU was on mop-up patrol with their drone drop munition operations. Then also, Ukrainian soldiers from the 45th Separate Artillery Brigade destroyed a Russian field ammunition depot. Then also, on the map, there was no shortage of activity on the Novomikhailivka front, with another Russian attack being repelled to the north. Then, also in eastern Ukraine, a Ukrainian drone films a HIMARS strike on a Russian S-300 radar point, with supporting vans taking a hit as well. In a certain frame of the footage, you can see the S-300 system appears to be deploying its radar just prior to its untimely demise. Then lastly in the east, there was the case of a French-supplied Crotal NG SAM system in service with the Ukrainian 38th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment, seen here destroying a Russian UAV. So now we'll move across to the Zaporizhia front, as in a daring assault, a Russian armored vehicle of some unconfirmed description charged towards Ukrainian positions near Robotyne, only to be met with a swift and decisive response. So a Ukrainian ATGM, or anti-tank guided missile, found its mark, striking the vehicle with pinpoint precision, making for those Russian offensive tactics becoming abruptly neutralized. Then moving down, as for a quick update on the events in Jankoy in occupied Crimea from the other day, where Ukraine struck an airfield with what was very much reported to be ATACMS missiles, where we've now seen satellite imagery of the fallout or destruction of the systems, where Ukraine was right on the money, hitting those 4 S-400 air defense systems there, the launchers, among other parts as well, which I'm sure would even put a smile on Bordanov's face, as it could also very much be considered a shaping operation for future ambitions beyond, not the least of which would be the Crimean Bridge. Then, speaking of Bordanov, as for a brief mention of updates from a couple of days ago in Stavropol, where Russia lost its T-22 long-range strike aircraft, and a modernized version of it at that, as more details came to light on this event. As Bordanov, head of Ukraine's military intelligence agency, confirmed that the aircraft was shot down by Ukrainian missiles. So Bordanov advised that the operation, which took a week to prepare, involved striking the aircraft at a distance of 308 kilometers using the very same means employed to take down one of the A-50 spy planes from February. And that is to say, through the use of a previously retired, then reactivated S-200 air defense system, utilizing extended range missiles. And despite its obsolescence, the Soviet-era S-200 long-range surface-to-air missile was proven to be a valuable asset for Ukraine in its ongoing conflict with Russia. Now, originally designed to counter American long-range strategic aircraft during the Cold War, the S-200 has undergone several modernizations since its initial deployment in the 60s, including in this case longer range and higher ceiling altitude for its missiles. In fact, rumors of Ukraine's renewed use of S-200 missiles began circulating in the summer of 2023, with the Russian Ministry of Defense also having some awareness in these developments, previously claiming that converted S-200 missiles had been shot down over various regions. Then to some news updates, and in follow-up to the earlier mentioned aid bill passing through the US House of Reps so far, the package includes funds for advanced weapons, replenishing US stockpiles, supporting regional allies, and purchasing defense systems for Ukraine. The bill will now proceed to the Senate for a vote before reaching the US President for signing, and as mentioned, the House measure enables the executive branch to seize immobilized Russian assets and direct them towards Ukraine's defense and recovery efforts. But aside from the irony that Russian money abroad will be used against Russian invaders in Ukraine, many Russian oligarchs will silently blame Putin for this blunder, very likely. You see, Putin usually tries to compensate for such blows by giving oligarchs something in exchange, but the sheer volume of really what's up for grabs, frozen Russian assets and money abroad, will make this impossible. billions would be gone for good, and the oligarchs wouldn't forget it, leading to certainly rising tensions in the Putin system. Then, for some more hardware-related news updates, if we can call it that so far, I briefly wanted to show you guys one of the many drones that the Ukrainian army creates and employs, which do indeed come in all different shapes and sizes. Like this one, called the Queen of Hornets, an FPV drone, another one locally produced in Ukraine, that has a top speed of up to 150 kilometers per hour, which is about 90 miles per hour, and a payload size of about 6 kilos, which is about 13 pounds. And you'll notice the blue on top, which is the lithium-ion battery. And so this one is designed for shorter range and is indeed intended for frontline targets, including infantry fighting vehicles, and definitely for tanks as well. Then moving across to some Russian hardware news updates. So in a bid to bolster Russian military capabilities, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu visited the Omsk tank production plant to assess the implementation of the defense procurement plan he issued in June of last year. The plan included production of T-80 tanks, but also the conversion of T-72 chassis onto TOS-1A heavy flamethrower systems, which is a terrible idea, as those short-range TOS-1A systems don't last more than 10 minutes after being deployed out there in the field. And then lastly, it was also mentioned the addition of armor for retrofitting older tanks deployed in Ukraine. Now, during his inspection, Shoigu was said to find that the enterprise reported successful trials of enhanced armor protection and increased production of TOS-1A systems by 150%, but bear in mind, 150% of almost nothing is, well, almost nothing. Also, during all of this, Shoigu stressed the need to further increase the supplies of enhanced tank protection kits for Ukraine. And also, during all of this, Shoigu stressed the need to further increase the supplies of enhanced tank protection kits for units in Ukraine. He's probably seen his fair share of destroyed Russian tanks at this point, I'm sure. However, even then, for what he's saying he's seeing and what's happening here, the reality of all of these claims is difficult to confirm. And despite Russian MOD assurances of targets being met, independent estimates suggest that the actual numbers may be far lower than reported. And also noting that what is produced is likely far below acceptable quality for in-field use. All due to unreasonable pressure placed on these factories to pump out whatever they can, which in my experience is more often than not refurbished older Soviet tanks that they pull out of Soviet stockpiles in order to meet their tank production quotas. And I use the term production very loosely there. Then headed across to something of a Russian military mobilization blunder segment, so in a desperate bid to stem the tide of dwindling conscription numbers, Moscow has launched an aggressive propaganda campaign across Russian regions, including the deployment of militaristic agitprop trains, or propaganda trains, reminiscent of the Soviet era. Now, as fewer Russians show willingness to enlist in the military and join the Kremlin's war against Ukraine, the regime is doubling down on its efforts to manipulate public opinion. According to Kyiv's main intelligence director at the HUR, the drop in spring conscription numbers reflects a growing reluctance among Russians to sign contracts with the military, which continues to wage war and occupy Ukrainian territories. In response, the Russian government is intensifying its information warfare, as they are glorifying military service and falsely claiming that conscription guarantees non-participation in the conflict. So the Russian railroad has been co-opted into the propaganda campaign, with passenger train cars and cargo containers adorned with militaristic imagery celebrating the Russian army, weapons and equipment. So this blatant attempt to sway public opinion has been enacted as the Putin regime desperately tries to rally support for its failing war effort. Of course, after enough time, there's more than enough rumors inside of Russia for people to know that the Kremlin promises cushy, high-paid, low-risk military roles, only to have countless video appeals from mobilized Russian soldiers as they state that they got roped into the exact opposite of what they were promised. And we've seen a lot of that. Oh, by the way, the flashy vehicle you see on the train there is a Russian 4x4 Typhoon MRAP, which had a limited production run, and based on my research, this vehicle is almost definitely a prototype. But hey, it looks good. Then moving across to a couple of quick funnies to round it all off today, guys. So this one might seem a bit odd, but it's all about the messaging Russia provides globally. For instance, in follow-up to the recent news updates about US military aid to Ukraine, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said in a response, quote, "The decision of the US House of Representatives to pass a bill to help Ukraine will further enrich the US and further ruin Ukraine." So, talking about enriching the US is usually at direct odds with a lot of Russia's previous messaging. Then, Peskov also stated the following, quote, "Confiscation of Russian assets will damage the image of the United States and deter investors in the country." Yeah, no, I don't think so. Then headed across to a quick final funny to round it all off for today, guys. So, Russian servicemen filmed themselves complaining about the quality of old and rusty 152mm Soviet shells that they received. So the fuses need to be knocked out, they're all rusted out from years of bad storage conditions. They also had problems screwing in and replacing the fuses. So a lot of ammunition is simply not battlefield ready when it's received. But then, when you look more closely at the details, the production year on some of these bad boys is 1937. And given that Soviet 152mm shells only started mass production in the 30s, it looks like Russia is almost literally down to, well, really scraping the bottom of the barrel with their Soviet artillery shell stockpiles. Just wow. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please feel free to like and comment again, and of all of your support, I am noticing it, and I really do appreciate it. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!